All right, welcome to Strider Tree Gear. Today I'm going to be talking about square filing. Say you've gotten really good at round filing and now you've got some felon saws that you want to be able to steer. Square filing is the way to go. Now you can always keep a bunch of extra chains and use them until they're dull, toss it and put a new one on and have them all go into the shop. But sometimes when you're out in the field, you just got to get that thing sharp and you got to get it done now, or you're out of chains or whatever, and that's where you got to be able to square file. It's a super useful skill. When you're good at it, I can square file a whole chain in the time it takes my new guys to swap one, which that's not really saying much, but it can be a perfectly reasonable way to get a good sharp chain on the job. So got a few tips and tricks for that, and here we go. All right, so these are the two different types of square filing files. There's kind of the narrower triangular one, and there's a little longer, flatter one. This one works great for very quickly touching up the top cutting edge, but it won't get the gullet. So you can go through and make a sharp chain real fast with this one, but you can only do it a couple times before you need to go at it with one of these with a wider flat face to actually be able to get the whole gullet cleaned out. So today I'm going to demonstrate this guy. You can do essentially the same thing with this, but we'll demonstrate with this because this will do it all. All right, so a couple of differences when it comes to square filing and round filing is that if I was round filing this chain, I'm going to be pushing the file with the direction of the tooth. So if the tooth is all the left-hand teeth, I'm pushing the file to the left. With the right-hand teeth, I'm pushing the file to the right. But with the square file, it's the opposite of that because I can't push the file with the teeth and still see all the angles that I need to see in order to get the tooth sharpened correctly. But I can see it if I'm pushing against the tooth. But that causes a problem. If I try to do that with even a slightly loose chain, I get really bad chatter. So, you know, if I try and get this on here, it's gonna just chatter like heck. Or it's gonna move around or whatever. Basically, it's just ineffective. It doesn't work very well. Second thing I should point out is that you darn well better use gloves when you're doing this because you're pushing your fingers right into the edge of these teeth. And a little slip, you can tear your finger open pretty good. I've actually got a little scar right here that's from one of those instances just the other day. So anyway, use gloves, use a nice sharp file. Don't let your files hit each other. Don't roll them up in a roll. As soon as the files bump on each other, especially these square files, all of these edges on the file get dinged up and then they don't cut very well on those corners. And it's all those corner edges that matter the most with square filing and getting all your angles lined up. So you want to use a nice, fresh, clean file and keep it away from all the other files that could chew it up, and it'll make them last longer. And you want these to last because they're like 12 bucks a piece. They're kind of pricey. So that's the basics. Let's get into the details. All right, so the first time I learned to square file, some old timer tree feller showed me this trick. It's really important to have a nice tight chain when you're square filing if you're gonna do it the traditional way. And so what he would do is he would just shove a wedge into the chain like that, and it pulls enough tension to where I can now file along here without getting chatter. Now, most of the time, and if you've got a nice positioned clamp or a vise like this, then this can be the kind of the most comfortable way to do it. But most of the time in the field, I don't have a vise. I'm doing it on the back of my tailgate, and everything's moving around. So I actually have a little bit of a different method that I want to spend most of the time showing you, but I'll just go over this one real briefly. You got the wedge in there tight. The next thing you're trying to do is line up all your angles with the faces on this file. I'm going to show you that up close here in a minute, but I'll give you the general form. So for all these right-hand teeth, I'm going to line myself up with the right-hand side of the blade. I'm going to get my angles lined up, and I'm actually going to push the file down against the tooth, essentially in this sort of motion. And you want to have really consistent, precise angles. You should dig in just a little bit on the tooth on the other side if you're doing it right. And you should end up cutting away the gullet and the top edge together when it comes down to it. So that's Got a nice sharp saw here. It's still wanting to chatter just a little bit, which means I could potentially get the chain a little bit tighter, but it's close enough. So that's probably gonna be good there. You should never wait till your saw is so dull that you need to take 15, 20 strokes. If you file it regularly, you should be able to get away with 2 or 3 strokes per tooth and be all good. It'll take you way less time, it's more efficient just to stay on top of it than it is to try and hammer it dull and then bring it back. You can bring it back to life, but it's hard. Okay, now I want to show you guys how I generally do it. Okay, so before we start filing, we need to know the key characteristics of a square tooth, a square chisel tooth. So the top edge here and this vertical edge here on the side, those are your 2 primary cutting surfaces. Those need to have correct geometric profiles. One of the best indicators of the correct geometric profile is the crease that goes from this top corner, this outside corner, down to the inside corner of the tooth. When you're done filing, you want to be able to see that line lined up between those 2 planes going inside there, from corner to corner. And the more perfectly that's in the corner, the better. If this line goes a little bit into the top of the plane, like I'm sort of showing with the pointer there, that's going to perform very poorly. If it goes into the vertical plane over here, down lower, you're going to have a little bit of a hook to your tooth, and you can get away with that a little bit. You can get away with a little bit of a hook. But if you have too much of it, it'll make for a really grabby tooth, just similar to as if you use too small of a round file. So the important part to look at with your finished tooth is to have this edge at the appropriate angle with the appropriate taper this direction. I mean, you should have, it should come together with the appropriate angle, yeah, there. And then this vertical edge, similar, you want it to have a little bit of a forward facing lean, so it shouldn't be vertical relative to the bar. It should be forward facing just a little bit, like this one. And you want most of the gullet cleaned out. So this one's got a little bit of gullet left right here, but that's not going to be a problem yet. I could probably sharpen this tooth once or twice more before I want to come back and use a big round file or the big square file and get the gullet out. Then, last but not least, you need the height of the top of this tooth to the top of the raker to be the correct difference in height so that the tooth's not too hungry, so it's not trying to take too big of a bite out of the wood. If the raker is filed down too low, then this tooth will tend to grab inside the cut and it'll stop the chain dead and be very difficult and frustrating to use. If it's too high, then the opposite is the case. It won't pull itself through the cut, it won't cut quickly no matter how sharp the tooth is, and you'll be putting a lot of pressure, a lot of extra wear and tear on your saw. So that correct height difference is important, and the best way to get that is with a raker gauge, where you put the raker plate across the top of those 2, and it's got a little gap right here over the raker, so the raker kind of pokes through the plate, and then you file across the top of it, and it'll bring the raker down to the appropriate height. I'm not going to be demonstrating that today. I'm mostly just focusing on the tooth. Raker gauge is pretty easy, pretty straightforward to use. It's getting the angles right on this tooth that is the most difficult. So when I'm looking to file, what I'm trying to do is I'm going to use the top face, the wide face of my square file is going to be responsible for getting this top edge correct. And then this narrow, skinnier face on the sort of the corner is going to be responsible for getting this face, this vertical face correct. And so I'm using the angles of this file, and if you set it in there just right, you can actually see exactly the angle I used to get that, and it's right about there. And when you're filing square, unlike with round filing, where you're basically putting the file, perpendicular to the bar, and you're trying not to wiggle it this way, and you set your 30 degrees, and you try not to wiggle it this way, and that's all you need to do. The square file, you need to have a little bit of an up-down angle. You got to watch out for the roll of the file. You got to watch out for all of your planes of movement and keep them very precisely aligned. And that's why most people never learn this skill. But once you get it, it's not that difficult. So this is essentially the plane I want to maintain, where the top of it is filing the top edge, the side is following the side edge, and I'm going to be pushing it downward like this in very even, consistent, straight strokes until I see this line from the point here to the inside be nice and lined up, and I've got enough of a taper on both these faces to create nice sharp edges. So I'm going to do a little bit of a demo here for that. All right, so the technique I'm going to show you is one that I've personally developed. I have not seen other people use this, but it works great for me. I hold for doing both sides of the chain, I hold my file essentially the same. I'm right-handed, I hold it in my right hand. I've got a little bit of a grip kind of like this. Sometimes I'll have my finger up here, sometimes it's down like this. This makes my finger sore eventually, but I'm keeping it to where the wide flat plane is up, and then I'm going to manipulate my angle primarily, so I'm looking at my wrist, looking at my shoulder, and I'm going to do a nice, even, smooth strokes. So I don't have a lot of tension in this blade. It's pretty easy to spin in this chainsaw, in the chain. And what I'm going to be doing here to get my angles right is move the tooth down a little bit onto probably, whatever that is, that's probably 15, 20 degrees down around the radius of the end of the bar. And that allows me to have my file flat. So I kind of move the tooth down until my flat file is the correct angle. So if it's up here, I need to be pushing down in order to have the correct angle. And so I just move the tooth to where so I can keep this flat. Now that helps me eliminate one plane of motion. And so now, as I start to file, the next difficulty I have is the chatter. There's so much wiggle here, the chain is loose. I can't just hold the bar, or I need to hold the tip of the bar from wiggling. So what I do is I use the inside of my thumb and I apply pressure on the outside of this tooth. Actually, I push right here on the raker with my thumb, and I kind of ride the file just barely over my thumb. And what that's going to do is put pressure on the tooth this way, in this direction, and it's going to lock it in so I can avoid the chatter. And then all I got to consider is the rotation here and the back and forth motion here. So while I'm looking down at the side of my tooth to try and line that up, I'm going to move my file around until it's just got the right angle. And it's about a 30-degree difference. So if I've got here, it's roughly a 30-degree angle here to the bar. It's flat this way as far as rotation. And then I'm watching, so it's flat this way and this way. So that helps kind of limit some of the planes of motion. And now I'm just going to do very consistent, even pushing strokes into the tip of the tooth. And what I'm watching as I'm filing this, I want to make sure that this corner, this ridge on the file, it's the joint between the first face going off the backside and the flat face here, this joint right here at the tip of that is the one that is forming that primary line on the inside of the tooth. And so I want to make sure that the ridge of that is lining up perfectly with the point of the tooth right there. So that's the biggest thing I'm focusing on, is just keeping that ridge just in the right spot as I'm pushing a little bit of pressure like this up into the tooth. And that's going to form my tooth ideally. Now, obviously a file only cuts on the push stroke. And I can alter my angle just a little bit. I can tilt it just a little one way if I want to take more off the top edge, or I can tilt it a little bit the other way if I want to take a little bit more off the side edge without hitting the top edge. And then once I can see that I'm actually taking material off the top edge, I stop, because then that means I've finished that edge. And usually I'll stop, bend down and look at it. I'll sight along the front of it to see if I can see any reflection and to see if that line between the point and the inside of the tooth is lined up correctly. And if it is, and I don't see any reflection along the edge, that tooth is done. It's good, it's sharp. I move to the next one. Once I get in a groove, I won't check every tooth. I'll check every third or fourth tooth because that's all I need. Because I know that I'm doing almost the same motion for every single one. I'm making little slight micro adjustments as I'm going, as I see how my stroke is affecting that tooth. So a little more on the side there, a little more on the top on this stroke, and that looks pretty good to me. It's getting there. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on, taking kind of light passes. That one's got a little chunk off the edge, but I'm not worried about getting that all the way perfect. So we'll go to the next one. So the last time this was filed, it got filed with a little bit too much angle. So this angle has a little bit more point to it than it should. So I'm going to try to adjust that a little bit and get that angle here a little bit flatter. Not much, just a little bit. There we go. And that should do it right there. Once again, I'll look at that tooth, double check it, looks good. Couple left-handers. And that's how that's going to go for that right-hand side. When I switch over to the left-hand side, it's going to be really similar. Okay, so doing this side, for most people, is actually a little bit easier because I'm not changing my hand grip at all. My hand grip stays the same, but my left hand, which is holding the bar from wiggling, instead of applying pressure with the inside of the thumb out, I'm going to be pushing on the tooth from my side that way, applying pressure, and that's going to keep it from rotating. But otherwise, I'm going to line up my file much the same way. I'm going to kind of bring the tooth down a little bit on the round of the round nose of the bar. I'm going to make nice even strokes forward with all of my angles lined up. Obviously, the file doesn't cut in the backstroke. And that should be, well, I didn't quite take enough off the top, so I'm gonna cut more strokes. And now the pressure I'm pushing the file into the tooth this direction, obviously. Not a lot, just light pressure. If you find you're taking a lot of strokes, you need a lot of pressure, probably the file's dull. It's been chewed up from banging on stuff, it's used up, and you need to replace the file. A nice fresh file makes this process so much easier. So go to this next tooth here. So this side sometimes is when I'll put my finger here on the edge, and it seems to work better. Bingo. That one's probably golden there. Yeah. So you'll see I am taking a little bit off of the link on the back side, and that means that that should happen. Basically, anytime you're sharpening, you should be taking a little bit off this link on the back side, because that's the only way to get the appropriate angle. So if I were up on top like this, I would have to take a little bit off there anyway to match the angle that I need to have. That's how it would be going. But because I don't like that weird angle, I just bring it down to the nose just a little bit, and I do it flat right there. Once again, I'm just trying to make sure that this top ridge lines up with this ridge on the tooth, and the inside is lined up with the inside on the under part of the tooth. These ones are a little bit wonky shaped, Not really sure why. Taking a little more work than they usually do, but that's about right. And I'll go through and I'll usually do all of them on one side, then I'll switch sides, I'll do all of them. If there's a tooth that's really bad and I need a whole bunch more swipes to get it perfect, a lot of times I'll stop right then and I'll take an extra swipe or two off the raker as I go along. And then once I'm done, I'll look at all the rakers and see which ones are real shiny. Like this one already I can tell is much shinier than the rest. And I'll probably take a swipe or two off of that. And I won't do all of them, but I'll do the ones that I can tell have been rubbing in the wood much more than the rest. I could take a little more off the rakers for the for softwoods like this, but let's put it in some hardwood and see how that does. That'll work. It ain't perfect, but it's pretty close. So hopefully you guys found that useful. That was my method for square filing. I use that every day out in the field. It gives me great results. I always have fast ripping saws. So if you've got your own little tricks or techniques, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. You know, there's not too many square filers left, but I'd love to hear about it. And if there's anything else you'd like video made, little tips, tricks, anything you're curious about that you've seen on any of my work videos, I'd be happy to explain it. So be sure to let me know as well. And I'll catch you next time on Strider Tree Gear. Thanks.